A deepening stillness now haunts the sanctuaries of old, a void created because the youth have quietly slipped away from the polished pews to seek the raw, untamed wilderness of truth. I implore you to gaze into the mirror of your soul. Are you still tithe-binding 10% of your sweat and labor to shepherds who grow obese on systems that have historically crushed the spines of your very own ancestors? Do you continue to bestow the sacred title of pastor upon mere men who navigate the earth in chariots of excessive luxury, steering Bentleys through the streets, while your own bloodline struggles to maintain a simple roof over their heads? Lean in and let these words penetrate your spirit, for the revelation I am about to unveil is destined to shatter the fragile illusions you cling to regarding the institution, the nature of faith, and your own divine identity. We have crossed the threshold into the year 2026, arriving at a cosmic tipping point, a new event horizon that the slumbering masses never perceived in their dreams. In truth, none beheld its coming save for those few mystics who have been decoding the sacred texts with their own vision, bypassing the gatekeepers who desperately sought to monopolize the divine narrative. The sociological scrolls from Gallup research unveil a devastating truth. Membership within the spiritual houses among black adults has plummeted by nearly 20 percentage points in the span of merely 2 decades. The data, harvested by the Pew Research Center, updated for our current vantage point in 2026, paints a stark masterpiece of decline. Only 73% remain within the Christian fold, a precipitous drop from 85% back in 2007. Understand this clearly. This is not merely a slight statistical dip or a gentle fading of the daylight. This is a mass exodus, a spiritual migration of biblical magnitude, fleeing the house of bondage. And behold, it is the youngest lineage, the ones known as Generation Z, who lead this courageous charge out of the temple doors, with a mere 15% continuing to attend with any regularity. It stands as the lowest participation figure ever recorded for any generation in the entire history of these United States, a definitive sign that the great wheel of the ages is turning. Yet, here lies the esoteric secret the masters of the pulpit wish to keep buried in the shadows. This exodus is not a crisis of faith, but a glorious, terrifying awakening of the collective soul. The brick-and-mortar church of your grandmother was not fortified to withstand this day, and the celebrity preachers, blinded by the spotlight, did not prophesy this shifting of the celestial tides. The empires constructed on the backs of tithes and seed offerings never imagined a generation would simply turn their backs on the building to find the Most High dwelling in the silence of their own hearts. But the veil is tearing asunder right now, and there is a profound, divine reason why this revelation is fully manifesting in the vibration of the year 2026. This year marks the continuation of a sacred timeline, moving beyond the 400-year mark since 1625, when the deep roots of systematic spiritual and physical bondage first took hold in this soil. Does the number 400 resonate within the chambers of your spirit? It truly should, for it is etched deeply into the Holy Scriptures, specifically within the 7th chapter of the book of Acts. Verse 6 declares with haunting precision, "Your descendants will be strangers in a foreign country where they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. The ancient prophecy has reached its fullness and overflowed. This new generation is the first to realize they require no Eurocentric idol or prosperity merchant to access the divine source. Permit me to illuminate exactly who has been feasting upon your devotion in the name of God, and what the restless spirits of your ancestors are whispering to you in the winds of this new era. They have profited from your piety for centuries, but the spiritual wind is changing direction, and the call to action is rising from the very earth beneath your feet. If you still stand as a guardian for the institution that turned a blind eye to your systemic oppression, this message is designed to shake the very foundations of your belief system. However, if your spirit has been restless in those velvet seats, if you have felt the stirring intuition that something is fundamentally fractured, then abide with me a while longer. What I am about to reveal has been shrouded in deliberate darkness for 4 centuries, and the era of hiding is coming to a thunderous, inevitable end. I have not come to bring you comfort in your slumber or sing you lullabies. I have come to offer you the master keys to your own spiritual liberation. The numbers are written in stone and cannot be denied. Church membership among black adults has fallen by nearly 20 percentage points, an undeniable sign of the changing times. The scholars at Pew found that among the young black millennials and Gen Z who still walk the church grounds, only half choose to attend predominantly black congregations. Contrast this sharply with 2/3 of the baby boomers and the silent generation, who clung tightly to the traditions of old as if they were life rafts. According to the projections solidified in 2026, 61% of black adults now drift to these diverse congregations, a shift that signals the absolute end of an era. Ponder this deeply in your meditation. The sacred gathering place that held your foremothers together through the storm is dissolving before our very eyes. Your grandmother could not fathom a Sunday without the sanctuary's embrace, yet this rising generation cannot fathom why they should enter those iron gates at all. The hierarchy seeks to blame the secular world, to blame the adversary, to blame everything but the mirror. Yet the truth is simple, devastatingly pure, and impossible to ignore. The youth see through the stained glass, lies with piercing clarity. They see the luxury chariots in the reserved spaces and the mansions flaunted on digital screens. They witness scandal after scandal being swept under the altar cloth, futilely attempting to hide the rot that festers beneath the holy veneer. Consider the fall of titans like T.D. Jakes, a ruler of the megachurch age, who in the turbulent year of 2025 faced the dark storm of serious allegations. He wielded the law like a carnal sword, filing defamation suits to silence the voices that dared to speak truth against the throne. Even as mortal frailty overtook him on stage in a viral moment that stopped the world, the deeper question remains unanswered by the faithful flock. How did we arrive at a spiritual juncture where a man accused of such darkness still commands the pulpit, shielded by the hypnotic mantra, "Touch not God's anointed"? Reports indicate the lawsuit was dismissed in October 2025. Yet the shadow remains heavy over the men who told you to sow while they reaped millions. These are the shepherds who preached humility from pulpits carved of expensive marble, residing within temples that cost more than the struggling neighborhoods they overshadow. The contradiction is no longer a quiet whisper. It is a scream echoing through the halls of heaven, and Generation Z has heard the frequency clearly. Let me present the third seal of this unfolding revelation. The full exposure of the prosperity gospel, the golden calf of our modern time. This teaching offers a seductive, poisonous promise. Give your hard-earned coin to the church, and the divine will mechanically rain riches upon you in return. Send that seed offering into the dark void, and wait for a harvest that feeds the pastor to gluttony but leaves the congregation spiritually and financially hungry. Bishop T.D. constructed an entire empire at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church upon this very fragile, broken promise, and we have seen how the mighty have fallen. Ponder the man bearing the moniker Creflo Dollar, a title dripping with an irony so sharp it feels predestined, who stood before his congregation and proclaimed that their holy obligation was to bankroll his private aircraft, insisting it was the sole chariot, swift enough to transport the gospel to the earth's farthest corners. They seized upon the ancient, fragile parable of the widow's mite, a sacred testament to the potency of offering from a well of poverty, and contorted it into a burdensome shackle of shame designed purely to subsidize extravagant vehicles and lavish existences. They turned the scripture of Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, into a weapon, mandating the full tithe be delivered to the storehouse, distorting a celestial law into an instrument for spiritual racketeering. And while their vaults overflowed with surplus, the very flock they shepherded was left stumbling in the shadows, powerless to keep the hearth fires burning in their own dwellings. Yet, as the great wheel of time rotated toward the year 2026, a seismic shift began to vibrate through the ether. The digital landscape of social media evolved into a contemporary confessional for an exhausted generation, a sanctuary where the youth commenced speaking their unvarnished truth and dismantling the mirages that had long held them in thrall. One by one, voices ascended to proclaim, "I halted my tithes and began to steward my own harvest." And behold, they discovered their lives did not disintegrate into dust, but rather they blossomed. "I constructed my own holy altar within the refuge of my abode, and perceived the divine presence more vividly there than I ever did within those cold stone edifices. I ceased financing a preacher's ego and began pouring my spirit and assets back into the fertile soil of my own neighborhood. When the populace retains their offering, the counterfeit empire begins to splinter, and that is exactly the collapse we are observing in this current epoch. Gaze now upon the fourth seal of evidence that weaves this entire revelation into a single tapestry. Here is where the river of history flows into the ocean of prophecy. Acts chapter 7, verse 6, immortalizes the final oration of Stephen prior to his martyrdom, wherein he recollects the ancient pact established with Abraham. He uttered the prophecy, "Your lineage will dwell as strangers in a territory not their own, where they shall be enslaved and crushed underfoot for 400 years. 4 centuries. Etch that figure into your mind. For the initial documented arrival of enslaved Africans upon the coasts of English North America transpired in the year 1619. A profound arithmetic of the cosmos reveals itself. 1619 added to 400 years transports us to the year 2019. Yet, historians of the deep past observe that the systematic trade truly accelerated and solidified around 1626, which carries the timeline forward to 2026. Thus, in this very year, the prophetic circle finally closes its loop. And Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, pulls back the veil on yet another stratum of this archaic mystery that we dare not ignore. The scripture thunders, "The Lord shall return you in vessels to Egypt, on a voyage I commanded you should never undertake again. And there you shall present yourselves for purchase to your adversaries as bondmen and bondwomen." Vessels, chains, adversaries, these are not mere allegories or symbolic phantoms. They are precise, bone-chilling foreshadowings of a grim reality that actually materialized. It depicts with haunting accuracy the agonizing passage of black Americans whose forebears were stolen away, fettered in the bellies of wooden leviathans, and trafficked across the boundless Atlantic expanse. For ages, the institution instructed you to await your utopia in the afterlife, to clasp suffering as your holy cross, and to maintain a silence born of patience. But the voice of prophecy announces that 2026 is the year the ancient curse is shattered and the magnificent spiritual awakening ignites. This is the cause of the restlessness stirring within your soul. This is the reason the archaic sermons no longer penetrate your heart or provide the solace they once bestowed. This is why you cannot compel your feet to re-enter that structure, even when the specters of guilt attempt to drag you backward. You are waking up exactly at the ordained hour. Do not dismiss this as mere chance, nor label it a regression of faith. This is a divine rendezvous, a recalibration of the spirit. Allow that veracity to anchor deep within your essence. The mass departure of the youngest generation from the church in numbers never before seen is not a random event of chaos. It is unfurling exactly 4 centuries after the prophetic clock commenced its countdown. They are not forfeiting their faith. They are emancipating it from a system engineered to rule their consciousness. However, before we plunge further into the abyss of this current revelation, you must comprehend that this tribulation did not originate in 2026. This is a recurring cycle, a mechanism of domination that has been grinding its gears for hundreds of years. Every single time black people extended their hands toward liberty, the institution stood firm, clutching a Bible in one fist and iron manacles in the other. Now, let us turn the leaf to the 5th chapter of this grand saga. We are entering the 5 distinct epochs of historical control, mapping the genealogy of this spiritual suffocation. Permit me to shine a light on precisely how this strategy materialized through 5 eras of history. For once your vision is cleared to perceive the pattern, you will never view the world through the same lens again. Stage 1. The era of enslavement. In the obsidian days of chattel slavery, Christianity was not unveiled as a vessel of glad tidings or redemption. It was hammered into a weapon of total subjugation. The masters did not proclaim the scriptures out of affection for African souls, but selected specific verses with surgical exactitude to fabricate compliant chattel. Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters, according to the flesh. This passage from Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, was recited like a chant of suppression. Yet, the book of Exodus, that thunderous epic of the Almighty, shattering the fetters of the enslaved in Egypt, was conveniently muted and secreted away. Indeed, the oppressors engineered what is now recognized as the Slave Bible, published in the year 1807 by the Society for the Conversion of Negro Slaves, a tome that severed 90% of the Old Testament and 50% of the New Testament. They gouged out 90% of the ancient texts and half of the New Covenant. They cut away every narrative of deliverance, every instance where the divine aligned with the downtrodden, and every pledge of liberty. What remained was a gutted manual for servitude, a spiritual prison cell. The vibrant tapestry of African spiritual traditions was ripped apart and labeled as criminal. This coerced conversion was never regarding the salvation of souls. It was regarding their erasure. It was calculated to sever the lifeline to your ancestral wisdom and obliterate your indigenous communion with the Creator. It was an annihilation of everything that did not advance the agenda of the enslaver, utilizing the very holy text to allege your ancestors were cursed through the lineage of Ham. They wove a distorted interpretation of Genesis chapter 9 to persuade a people that their chains were the desire of God Himself. The churches themselves were transformed into panopticons, locations of surveillance and absolute control. The enslaved could not assemble to worship or petition the heavens without the vigilant gaze of the overseer, guaranteeing that no spirit of Moses would emerge from their midst to command, "Let my people go." To unseal the forbidden wisdom of the ancient scrolls was to court a tempest of ruin, for the overlords recognized that true literacy was a spark capable of burning down their kingdoms of clay. A terror gripped their hearts, the dread that those bound in iron might peer into the sacred mirror and recognize their true lineage, not as the cursed offspring of Ham, but as the royal, scattered seed of Israel awaiting deliverance in a strange land. A sinister geometry was carved into the bedrock of time, the weaponization of the holy name to forge invisible manacles upon the consciousness of the melanated brethren, guaranteeing their silence while filling the coffers of the taskmasters. This was never the breath of God. It was a frigid, systematic alchemy of domination that persisted as the wheel of ages turned. And so, the world drifted into the second great cycle, the shadowy era of divided worlds. Though the shackles of heavy steel were shattered from their limbs, the fetters upon the soul remained impossibly heavy. In this age of partitioned realities, citadels of worship arose from the dust, intended to be bastions of sovereignty, yet they were built upon fractured ground. Alas, a mournful paradox haunted these consecrated corridors. The congregants continued to sip from the chalice, filled with the bitter wine of their captor's philosophy, mistaking the poison for communion. The psyche was colonized by the spectre of a pale divinity, an icon enshrined upon every plaster wall and gazing judgmentally from the high, stained glass arches of the mind. Fathom the abyss of this metaphysical assault. The spirit was trained to genuflect before a deity who wore the precise countenance of the tyrant holding the lash, a messiah with locks of spun sunshine and eyes reflecting the Atlantic depths, an image entirely alien to the sun-scorched tribes of the wilderness, and bearing no kinship to the weary, brown countenances bowed low in the pews. Simultaneously, the thunderous orations erupting from the pulpits of the downtrodden echoed the cruel mandates of the cotton fields with frightening precision. Toil without pause, swallow the bitter bile of injustice, and tread softly into the night, for your crown of glory is reserved solely for the ghostly realm beyond the grave. Clothe yourselves in quietude, bridle your tongue, and perhaps the empire will toss a crumb of pity your way. This was the liturgy of surrender, masquerading as holiness. And while this sedative hymn of endurance drifted from the choir lofts, what nightmare walked the earth just beyond the threshold of the sanctuary? The gallows of the poplar trees bore a harvest of strange fruit, and the draconian codes strangled the breath from the village. The altar whispered, "Tarry for Jehovah," while the pavement screamed for immediate redemption. However, there existed seers attuned to a separate vibration within the cosmic hum, fiery spirits like Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey, who perceived the hidden rhythms of war. Their ears did not catch the whispers of a passive idol. They trembled before the roar of the breaker, the God of Exodus who snaps the yoke. They communed with the warrior divine, who anoints champions to topple the thrones of the wicked. They heeded the ancient oracles who stood before kings and breathed flame. And their reward? They were offered up as martyrs, often with the silent, complicit assent of the religious establishment. The very congregations that harmonized hymns about the radical Nazarene could not digest the visceral reality of an uprising within their own temporal sphere. The great wheel turned relentlessly. Tranquilize the soul, discipline the flesh, and harvest the toil. Fix the gaze upon the pearly gates in the clouds, so the eyes remain blind to the hellscape on the soil. Program the heart to accept tribulation as a medal of distinct virtue, rather than awakening to the truth that the architect of the universe abhors oppression and demands a balancing of the scales. The veracity of this decree burns with blinding intensity in the scroll of Amos, chapter 5, verse 24. It summons justice to roll down like a torrential flood and righteousness like a perennial torrent. Yet, that fierce imperative was conspicuously missing from the comfortable homilies of Sunday morning. Then the timeline shifted into the third epoch, the grand bifurcation of the path during the struggle for human dignity. Here, the spiritual inheritance splintered into two divergent fates. One trajectory pursued the prophetic blaze, incarnated by King and the valiant souls who marched into the teeth of the beast. These knights wielded the text not as a shield, but as a sword of absolute truth. They marshaled the multitudes and commanded the empire to gaze into the looking-glass of its own proclaimed creeds. They proclaimed a revelation that offered no solace to earthly potentates but rattled the deep pillars of their dominion, identifying bigotry as a transgression against the Most High. They laid their mortal frames upon the altar as living oblations. This was faith distilled to its most potent essence, a perilous fire that threatened to consume the established hierarchy. It stood in resonance with the mystics of old who defied Caesars. But as the 1980s and 90s emerged from the mists, a different, more insidious shadow began to lengthen. The ascent of the cavernous amphitheater and the seductive, glistening theology of Mammon. The transmutation was subtle yet cataclysmic. The focus drifted from the emancipation of the spirit to the accumulation of silver, from the theology of breaking chains to the idolatry of hoarding treasure. The holy ground was converted into a bazaar, and the movement calcified into a corporation. The rallying cry shifted from liberty for the captive to prosperity for the faithful. Comradeship with the broken was bartered away for the ambition to sit among the aristocracy. The visionary dream of the prophets was pawned for the keys to a gilded cage. These new barons of the rostrum aligned their destinies with the pharaohs of the era rather than the groaning masses in the brickyards. They stood in opposition to the outcast, casting judgment upon love itself, all while the fundamental rights of their own kin were being dismantled by the state machinery. They trumpeted a doctrine of self-aggrandizement, while the collective fetters rusted shut, mutating the pattern into its modern avatar. Seek your personal epiphany, and turn a blind eye to the community's imprisonment. Keep the flock pursuing the ephemeral vapors of personal gain, instead of constructing the granite fortifications of equity. Keep them crowding the pews and draining their purses, rather than harnessing their collective thunder to reshape the geography of the world. It was the same primordial manipulation, draped in glittering synthetic raiment, and it beguiled the multitudes for generations. Now, we cross the threshold into the Fourth Age, the empire of the Crystal Cathedral, spanning the years 2000 to 2020, while the hamlets surrounding them crumbled into urban dust. The fiefdoms of these colossal tabernacles ascended to scrape the firmament. This was the epoch of the celebrity herdsman, wielding the weapons of personal branding, literary empires, and total dominion over the broadcast frequencies. Figures like Jakes, Dollar, and Long erected multi-million-dollar citadels, replete with coffee houses and production suites, transforming the house of prayer into a den of merchandise. They traversed the stratosphere on wings of private steel, insisting such extravagance was requisite for the dissemination of the gospel. They resided in manners fit for royalty, framing their decadence as a mark of celestial approval, offering their lavish existences as evidence that the golden calf could indeed speak. The collection basket morphed into a speculative investment vehicle. Sow a seed of $1,000, they vowed, and witness the heavens pour down a deluge of fortune upon your head. It was a sorcery of the highest order, intricate and merciless, swaddled in the very parchment of the sacred volume. Whenever the sacred shroud was ripped away, as it happened time and time again, unveiling the festering wounds of avarice, the sins of the flesh, and the gluttony for dominion beneath, the sheep were merely given the same tired spell to chew on. Touch not the anointed king, ensure the vaults overflow, a celestial armor forged to protect mortal depravity. Yet, the dawn of the electronic eon summoned a tempest that would irrevocably reshape the horizon. Abruptly, the carefully woven glamours projected from the high seat encountered a feral, unconquerable adversary. The young ones carried a vision that pierced through the temple masonry, spying the hypocrisy, inhaling and exhaling within. With but a subtle gesture upon their screens in the pews, they laid bare the pastoral dragons, sleeping atop mountains of gold. The scrying glass of the infinite network exposed the chasm between the pulpit's call for poverty and the priest's excess. They stumbled upon forgotten rivers of gnosis surging beyond the iron gates, discovering untamed seers and divergent realities. What began as a quiet unrest in the spirit swelled into an undeniable vibration. Why does the spiritual guide traverse the earth in a carriage encrusted with diamonds, whilst the house of worship pleads for mere pennies to patch its leaking heavens? Towers of crystal and iron claw at the sky, while the broken-hearted are rendered mute. Why does this sacred assembly mirror the cold heart of a soulless bazaar rather than a sanctuary for the weary spirit? The splintering of the collective soul grew too burdensome to endure. The archaic engine, lubricated by centuries of hush money and fear, commenced its violent shuddering and metallic screaming. The ethereal plane of the web transformed into a grand chamber of witness, a place where notes were compared in the dark. The very bedrocks of the dominion began to quake. Part 5. The Great Quickening and the Renaissance of the Spirit, spanning from 2020 unto 2026. Then the year of the pestilence descended, and the fabric of time folded in upon itself. The plague bolted the heavy oak doors of the stone monuments, forcing the very solitude that the titans of the megaflocks dreaded above all else. Spirits were banished into the wild wastelands to seek the divine, without the theatrics of the spotlight, without the crescendo of the organ, and devoid of the trance-like swaying of the multitude. In the hallowed quietude of their solitary rooms, the doubts that had been silencing themselves finally found a tongue to speak. Does the breath of life truly reside within those mortar boundaries, or was I simply shackled by the heavy fetters of shame, constant observation, and heavy expectation? When the life force was thief-stolen from George Floyd, and the avenues exploded in a conflagration for righteousness, the rising generation cast their eyes toward the altar with a searing interrogation. Where have the menders of the breach gone? Where is the booming resonance that roars in defense of the downtrodden? Where lies the true magnetic north of morality? The stillness was not merely loud, it was profound, a chasm of absolute treachery. High-ranking pastors elected to feast at the emperor's table rather than weep with their sheep. The digital plaza of TikTok emerged as the new agora for verity throughout 2020 and 2021. Murmurs once suffocated in the shadows of the nave erupted into roars within sermons lasting but 60 seconds. The festering sores of the institution were sliced open for the entire globe to behold. The doctrine of avarice was taken apart, brick by gilded brick, under the unblinking gaze of millions. A starving, deep within the belly, awoke a craving for the ancient paths conversing with the lineage of ghosts, the rhythmic pulse of African mysticism, the enigmas of hoodoo, and the foundational roots of the Israelites. It caught the wind like a sanctified wildfire. That which was once taboo became the pilgrimage. By the turning of 2024 and 2026, the false effigies began to topple in rapid, thunderous succession. This was no longer a wandering spark, but a devouring hellfire. The design was so vivid that even the zealot, blinded by faith, was forced to confess the orchard was poisoned at the root. The judgment handed down by the ascending bloodline was instantaneous, total, and unbending as iron. There shall be no retreat to the land of bondage. The Spirit discovered a fresh dwelling place. Tabernacles were erected within the humble spaces of family parlors. Rites, once branded as shadows, were clasped close as the true illumination. The honoring of the ancestral stream and the folk sorcery of the subjugated underwent a magnificent rebirth. The awareness of the Hebrew Israelites rushed through the electronic veins of the world, murmuring the secrets of a name long forgotten. The epiphany that they were not merely guests invited in by charity, but the authentic heirs of the blood covenant, began to root itself deep. The statistics began to reflect the migrating soul of the populace. More than 50% of the new generation has turned their backs on the temples of hewn stone, or simply never crossed the threshold to begin with. Great basilicas that once vibrated with the thunder of thousands now only bounce the echoes of a few hundred spirits, mostly those crowned with the silver of old age. The assembly withers like a sun dipping below the horizon, with no morning star to herald a replacement. For across the eons, the establishment wielded the lash rather than salving the back. When iron shackles held bodies captive, they proffered verses to enslave the intellect. During the epoch of division, they sermonized a gospel of quiet submission. When the multitudes walked for the sake of honor, the institution bolted its gates. Yet when the age of avarice dawned, they fleeced the flock without a shred of mercy. But this lineage has proclaimed the termination of the era. The masquerade is not merely fracturing, it is disintegrating into meaningless powder. It is a complete, absolute, and irrevocable implosion. Now, peer deep into the gloom to discern who dines upon the spoils of this engine. For a leviathan this colossal, this systematized, does not endure without filling the belly of a master. Follow the tributaries of bullion, and you shall locate the pulsing core of the lie. First, gaze upon the self-appointed emperors of the rostrum. They reside in citadels of masonry, valued in the millions, concealed behind iron barriers, light years removed from the tribulations of the souls they profess to shepherd. Wings of polished steel are rationalized by empty rhetoric, claiming a necessity to ascend above the clouds to further their sacred campaign. They insist the atmosphere breathed by the common voyager is too turbulent for their divine labor, too disruptive for the penning of their homilies. Literary contracts, media dynasties, and speaking circuits, all constructed upon the fractured spines of those who surrender their final mites out of synthesized shame. The state grants them a cloak of invincibility, permitting them to exist as monarchs while contributing naught to the treasury, quite unlike the flock they so diligently shear. Let us strip the cover from the mathematics of this dominion, so the sheer magnitude of the harvest becomes undeniable. Manifest a vision of a tabernacle holding 10,000 souls, a typical gathering for these giants, where the common laborer earns $40,000 within a single orbit of the sun. A tithe of that sweat equates to $4,000 per spirit. Multiply that sum by 10,000. That is $40 million cascading like an unstoppable river every single year. $40 million. And this staggering sum does not even account for the levies dedicated to the building fund, the special ceremonial offerings, the fees for grand conferences, the merchandise, or the myriad other tributaries of revenue. One is compelled to gaze into the void and ask, into which shadowy abyss does this $40 million disappear? Within the stone walls of these colossal temples, the treasury remains a sealed chamber, shrouded in silence, with no scrolls of accounting ever unfurled before the eyes of the faithful. The keeper of the flock walks with impunity, bound by no earthly law, to open the sacred ledger to the sheep who fill it. The inner sanctum, the council of elders, is forged not of wisdom, but of loyalty, hand-picked sentinels sworn to silence. They cement the unwritten commandment, let no tongue rise in judgment against the vessel chosen by the divine. You are forbidden to seek the resting place of the gold. Instead, you are commanded to cast your seeds into the dark earth with blind devotion, trusting that the hands guiding the plough are righteous and unstained. But beware, for if one were to illuminate the path of the currency, if the searing light of truth were cast upon the books, the festering rot of corruption would be laid bare for all to witness. You would behold the heartbreaking revelation that the widow's final coin is not feeding the hungry, but fueling the decadent paradise and the dynastic ambitions of a solitary man. All the while, the village standing in the shadow of the temple remains shackled in poverty. This is the root of their terror. The very thought of a great exodus sends shivers through the spine of the hierarchy. Without the ceaseless rushing river of tithes, the kingdom turns to dust. The iron wings of private jets are clipped, and the gates of the sprawling palaces are breached by the inevitable hand of debt. The airwaves, once dominated by their voices, would fall into a heavy silence. They know this in the marrow of their bones. They can feel the ancient foundations of their world beginning to quake. Thus, a desperate hunger arises to keep the souls tethered to the machine, to maintain the illusion of spiritual order. Yet, the high priests are not the only ones feasting at this table. The powers of the world find use in this design. The principalities of the state observe with approval, for they find great utility in a multitude that has been lulled into submission. View this through the eyes of those who weave the tapestry of control. They desire a citizenry conditioned to wear suffering like a crown of glory, to bow before the throne of authority, and to defer their cry for justice until they reach the shores of the afterlife. Such a flock is easily herded. They do not rise in righteous fury, they do not stitch together webs of resistance, and they pose no peril to the established order of the ages. These sacred institutions enjoy a freedom from tribute that denies the treasury billions of dollars in gold each year. Yet, the rulers deem this a meager price to pay, for the church serves as the ultimate shackle of the mind. The dusty scrolls of history testify to this unholy covenant. In the days of the great struggle for civil rights, the all-seeing eye of the agency remained fixed upon the radical sanctuaries, the holy grounds where the fires of protest were kindled and the people were awakened. Agents of the state sought to slip into the fold like wolves, sowing the seeds of discord to dismantle the movement from the inside out. However, the temples dedicated to the gospel of gold, those preaching the pursuit of personal riches and silence, were left undisturbed by the watchers. They threatened not the gears of the machine. In truth, they were the very mortar binding the stones of the system. This gospel evangelizes a lonely path, proclaiming that your breakthrough is a solitary pilgrimage. It whispers the seductive lie that your blessing belongs to you alone, that your elevation is measured only by your faith, blinding your eyes to the iron chains of systemic iniquity. Such a doctrine acts as a potent acid, dissolving the sacred bonds of the tribe. If every soul is running a race for their own purse, their own land, their own chariot, then none are gathering to break the yoke of the whole. There is no sharing of the harvest, no construction of a fortress where the community might find strength against the storm. While you are fervently chanting for your personal financial miracle, the powers that be are dismantling the village, fracturing the lineage, and ensuring your gaze remains fixed upon the mirror rather than the horizon. The dark machinations of the political realm are woven seamlessly into the fabric of the sermon, flowing like a hidden current from the high pulpits of the megachurch. The shepherds guide the hands of the flock within the voting booth, shielding their own access to gold and influence, rather than feeding the desperate hunger of their people. They stand beaming in portraits with the powerful. They sit upon the high councils of the land. But what fruit does the community taste from these barren trees? Often, it is nothing but the chaff of empty vows. The pastors desire to be seen as kings, as the grand brokers of the realm, and the politicians use them as gatekeepers to the soul of the people, offering little in return but the shimmering mirage of access. Make no mistake, they do not seek your liberation, they seek your manageability. It is the subtle reinforcement of the ancient structures of dominion. The third entity feasting upon this arrangement is the spirit of supremacy itself. I realize this is a heavy accusation, but I ask you to walk this shadowed path with me. The depiction of the divine in the image of the European is no accident of the brush. It is the colonization of the psyche. If the Creator wears the face of your oppressor, you unknowingly bow to oppression as the will of heaven. If the King of Kings possesses the features of the conqueror, then the conqueror must sit closer to the throne, must be more righteous, must be the very standard of existence. That is the silent sermon embedded in every portrait of a pale Messiah. And it is a poison that works. It cultivates a deep, religious sense of inferiority within the soul. This theology of greed was not birthed in our houses. It was imported directly from the altars of others. Men like Kenneth Copeland and Joel Osteen were the architects of these doctrines. Then, the shepherds of the community took this foreign fire and sold it back to their own congregations as holy light. They handed you a theology forged in the fires of another culture and named it your salvation. Meanwhile, the suppression of the ancestral bond and the demonization of indigenous wisdom served the empire of supremacy to perfection. For if the people were to remember that their ancestors walked with the divine long before the iron chains were forged, before the faith was weaponized, before the scourge of colonization, they might begin to ask dangerous questions. They might awaken to the terrifying realization that their spirituality was stolen, just as their lands, their labor, and their very names were stripped away in the night. They might begin the sacred work of decolonizing their minds and their faith. And that possibility strikes a cold terror into the heart of the system. This is the reason why the awakening of the true identity is combated with such ferocity by the institutions of the mainstream. The revelation that the people of the diaspora might be the literal bloodline of the book, not strangers grafted in, but the true heirs of the ancient covenant, changes the very fabric of reality. This sudden unveiling shatters the iron shackles of doctrinal tyranny, breaking the heavy yoke that has enslaved the spirits of the believers for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Whispers from the dust of antiquity and the testimony of forgotten parchments reveal that the seed of Israel sprang from earth, kissed by the fierce sun, abiding in the deep heart of Africa and the mystical cradle of the Orient. The very rocks beneath our feet scream in chorus with the findings of the digger's spade, while the chronicles of ancient days reflect this undeniable truth like a polished mirror. However, a suffocating shroud was thrown over this reality, a calculated erasure that sought to repaint the holy, dark-skinned countenances of the text with the pale, cold likeness of the vanquisher. Though the doubters may hurl their rocks of scorn at this rising tide for wanting their sanctioned seals of approval, and while some on the edges drift into the wilds of fanaticism, the pulsating spiritual core of this great awakening utterly demolishes the fortresses of old thought. For in that moment when the scattered tribes look deep into the sacred scrolls and see their own faces gazing back from the lines of prophecy, the bedrock of their belief shifts and reforms forever. They shall no longer crouch as paupers, pleading at the threshold of a foreign sanctuary. Instead, they ascend to take back the birthright thieved from their forefathers ages ago. The master builders of the present hierarchy shake with dread at the sight of such regal authority. For the one who truly feasts on things as they are is none other than the institutional edifice itself. It stands as a gargantuan engine, lifted high above the tender spirits of the common folk, casting a long and terrible shadow. This titan of a system gorges itself on unseeing loyalty, the endless cycle of seventh-day gatherings, the steady river of silver poured into the plate, and the sweat of uncompensated toil that keeps the wheels turning, all while commanding a hush over its decay and destruction. Make no mistake, the organization will invariably select its own continued existence over the protection of the sheep, failing not once, but in every single instance throughout history. When the black bile of scandal seeps into the light, watch the ceremonial response unfold. Protect the leader at all costs. Heap guilt upon the bleeding victim. Silence those who saw. Diminish the gravity of the transgression until it seems small. They will weave intricate fables of battles in the unseen realm to divert your gaze. But do not let your eyes be clouded. This is not the hand of the Almighty moving. It is the desperate clutching of temporal dominion. These sects rest comfortably on gilded seats, amassing billions in sprawling lands, heavy books of commerce, and treasures that can be touched and held. That modest house of prayer where the matriarchs bowed their knees may rest upon soil worth millions, yet the parchment of ownership is held far beyond the reach of the local kin. Possession lies not with the gathering of the faithful, but within remote citadels, controlled by boards without visages and guardians who dwell in the shadows. They clutch the keys to the treasury tight, while the congregants foot the bill for the very broom that sweeps the dust. Yet a great chasm of population draws near. The departure of the young blood threatens to famish this ravenous creature. If the sons and daughters do not come back, if they do not chain their offspring to these shrines, if they refuse to bankroll the days to come, this whole dominion shall dissolve into ash and memory within 20 years. And those who guard the doors perceive with sharp clarity the creeping dusk that signals the end of their day. They observe the precipice inching ever closer. A cold terror walks the corridors of their high councils and the summits of their supreme commanders. They debate how to varnish the tomb to lure the youth, how to dress up old rites in new garments. Yet their tongues are tied before the one question that truly matters. Why ought the souls who have opened their eyes swear allegiance to a citadel that has played them false over and over again? Why should they empty their stores into a machine that gluts the elite while the multitude goes hungry? Why bow in fidelity to a regime that commanded they bite their tongues when the innocent were harmed? They refuse to voice these inquiries, for the answer requires nothing less than the complete unmaking of their ladder of power. And rest assured, those who gorge themselves at the structural feast will never, of their own will, overturn the table. Therefore, when the vaults are barren, when the offspring turn their backs, when the great halls ring with hollow silence, the kingdom has no option remaining but to collapse. Shed no tears for the fall of Babylon. This is no calamity. This is the scales of the divine finding balance. This is the scroll unrolling. This is the 400 years of bondage coming to a roaring, thunderous finale. I can feel the tremor of pause within your soul, the silent arguments taking shape in the stillness of your intellect. I perceive the protests building up like a fortification of stone, for these desperate murmurings have reached my ears 1,000 times in days past. Come now, let us journey together through the canyon of these justifications, inspecting every shield raised to cling to a fractured order, and I will show you why they are nothing more than vapor vanishing at the break of dawn. The primary idol they hoist high is the decree, lay no hand upon the anointed of the Lord. It is the initial buckler lifted, when truth illuminates the rot, screaming, "You dare strike at the selected vessel? How dare you place a finger on the consecrated of the Most High, or bring injury to his mouthpieces?" They chant this passage like a mystic incantation of invulnerability, a magical ward to guard every chieftain from the weighing of their deeds. But listen closely to this verity. I aim no blow at the truly sanctified. Rather, I lay bare the doctrines that have strayed far from the narrow way of the ancient text. There exists a universe of difference between unjust persecution and righteous accounting. The sacred writings themselves order us to measure the spirits. 1 John chapter 4, verse 1 proclaims, "Beloved ones, place not your faith in every spirit, but put them to the trial to discern if they originate from the divine, for a multitude of liars have ventured forth into the earth." The Anointed One himself provided the supreme criterion. Matthew chapter 7, verse 16, "By the harvest they bear, you shall comprehend the essence of the tree." Display to me the fruit of a castle costing $5 million while the believers sleep in the gutters. Show me the fruit of a silver mechanical bird soaring the heavens while the hamlet below lacks even a crust of bread. Reveal to me the fruit of exquisite silks and chariots of opulence while the families of the congregation cannot put food upon their boards. These are not the harvests of virtue. These are the acrid yields of predation. The Christ stood resolute against the ecclesiastic overlords, void of all terror. Consult Matthew chapter 23. He branded the Pharisees as sightless leaders, performers on a stage, painted sepulchres, and a nest of vipers. To harbor the violator is not to pay homage to the Maker, it is to stand guard over the shadow. To insist upon justice is no assault upon the consecrated. It is the supreme manifestation of submission to the Logos. Objection number 2. The edifice is the domicile of God. The second petition is whispered thus: the gathering is imperfect, yet it endures as the habitation of the Almighty. We are obliged to stay and mend the fissures from the inside. Herein lies the deadly error in such reasoning. The construct of fired clay and cement is not the residence of the divine. Acts chapter 17. The ancient scrolls whisper a thunderous revelation in Acts chapter 17, verse 24, unveiling a reality that dissolves the mirage of human limitation. The great Creator, who spun the cosmos into existence and breathed life into the void, being the high sovereign of all realms, celestial and terrestrial, cannot be held captive within stone sanctuaries erected by mortal hands. The infinite essence refuses to be imprisoned between 4 static walls. You require no cathedral of brick and mortar, no physical gateway to commune with the eternal. Let your spirit dwell upon the wisdom of 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Verse 19 poses a query that reverberates through the canyons of the soul. Do you not perceive that your very vessel is the Holy of Holies, the dwelling place of the sacred Spirit? You are the living, breathing tabernacle, not the cold edifice with its towering spires and stained glass casting long shadows upon the pavement. Yet, the grand machinery of organized religion has systematically conditioned your mind to believe that spiritual liberation is unattainable without their stamped seal of validation. They proclaim with rigid authority that you require the physical structure, the orchestrated program, and the cleric standing as a divine intermediary. But I tell you, this is not the breath of the written word. That is simply the iron grip of human control masquerading as holy doctrine. Then comes the third great deception, whispered in the dark, that to walk away from the institution is to forsake the Most High. They accuse you of leading wandering souls into a barren wilderness. Let us tear down that veil of confusion with the sword of truth. I am not shepherding souls away from the Creator. I am liberating them from the charlatans who wear His sacred name like a costume to hide their greed. Exiting a decaying and corrupted religious system is structurally and spiritually distinct from turning your back on the divine. In reality, severing the cord with the institution may be the precise act of radical obedience the Spirit is demanding of you in this hour. Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 1 through 2, inscribes the thunderous verdict. Woe unto the shepherds who destroy and scatter the flock of my pasture. Then arises the fourth line of defense, the desperate plea that not every assembly is poisoned at the root. They protest, crying out, not all sanctuaries operate in this shadow, and while a sliver of truth remains there, the rot has penetrated so deeply that 55% of the rising generation has already dissolved into the mist, vanishing from the pews. The decay is so profound that membership has plummeted by 20 percentage points in merely 20 years. This is no mere statistical anomaly. It is the undeniable revelation of a total systemic collapse. And here lies the heart of the darkness. When the scandals erupt like festering boils, where are the righteous shepherds standing to condemn the wolves? Their silence is not neutrality, it is a damnable complicity. The entire architecture is designed to crush those who dare speak the truth, while shielding those who prey upon the innocent. Then arises the fifth objection, the nostalgic argument of historical legacy. They ask with trembling voices, what of our history? What of the good that has been wrought in days past? I bow in deep, solemn reverence to the prophetic tradition of the Black Church. I honor the sanctuaries that served as secret stations on the Underground Railroad and the strategic war rooms of the civil rights movement. But do not be deceived that sacred assembly of liberation is not the prosperity gospel empire we behold today. The congregation that risked death for freedom is galaxies apart from the modern corporation charging $300 for a VIP seat just to hear a sermon. The righteousness of yesterday cannot wash away the stain of the iniquity we witness today. We must now speak of the great call to Exodus. Departing from the physical building does not equate to departing from the divine presence. What if the act of walking away is actually your supreme demonstration of faith? What if the Most High is summoning you out of a spiritual Egypt to journey toward the promised land of truth? Hosea chapter 4, verse 6 declares, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." The institution has fed you their curated crumbs of knowledge, their filtered interpretations, and a theology engineered to keep you docile, manageable, and asleep. But the hour has arrived to pursue the raw, unfiltered truth for yourself. Consider the seismic awakening of the Hebrew Israelite consciousness. The fulfillment of the 400-year prophecy signifies that a massive, tectonic spiritual shift is unfolding at this very moment. Acts chapter 7, verse 6, and Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, speak of 4 centuries of affliction in a strange land. That timeline has reached its fullness. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68, foretells a people brought back to a spiritual Egypt in ships. Cargo ships traversing the horrors of the Middle Passage, carrying souls sold into bondage. Ask yourself, what if the people branded as black in the Americas are, in truth, the scattered descendants of the biblical Hebrews mentioned in ancient prophecy? This profound realization is precisely why the mainstream religious structure fights against this awakening with such primal ferocity. Because the moment you discover your true lineage, you cease begging for spiritual crumbs from the table of another. You begin to read the scriptures not as a mere spectator, but as the heir reading their own family history. Now, let us address the paralyzing fear of isolation. Many tremble at the thought that without the church, community withers and dies. Here is the revelation: you must build it yourself. Your ancestors did exactly this in the days of old. They formed gatherings in humble homes where souls truly knew one another. They built networks of mutual aid where bread and resources were shared without the red tape of bureaucracy. The church does not hold the copyright on human community. They have merely monetized the desperate human need for connection. If these words are vibrating within your spirit, shaking the foundations of your slumber, do not merely watch this vision and return to the fog. This is a kairos moment, a prophetic intersection of time and destiny, and you are a vital thread in this cosmic tapestry. Declare your awakening to the universe. Inscribe the word "awakened" in the comments below. Let me witness those who are ready to admit what their spirit has long known. Pass this signal to those who have been wandering in the valley of doubt. If you have walked out of the church doors in these past few years, write Exodus as your testimony. I need you to understand that you walk this path with a vast multitude. This message is not here to dismantle your faith. It is here to liberate your faith from the hands of those who weaponized it to keep you in chains. You are not a rebel for asking why a shepherd needs a third palace while the sheep starve. You are not backsliding for walking away from an atmosphere that reduced you to something small, contained, and controlled. You are awake. And to be awake in a world that demands your slumber is the most dangerous threat to a corrupt system. Your ancestors groaned in the spirit and prayed for the rising of this very generation. They prayed for the ones who would finally shatter the shackles, not just the iron on the wrists, but the mental prisons and the religious chains that are often the hardest to break because they are painted to look like holiness. This is the consciousness of the remnant rising from the ashes. You are not insane for perceiving what the masses refuse to acknowledge. You are conscious, you are aware, You are part of the remnant that values difficult truth over comfortable lies. This is not merely my tale to weave. This is our collective epic. You are an active participant in this prophetic unfolding, whether you fully grasp the magnitude or not. The very fact that you remain here, watching, the fact that this frequency resonates with the deepest core of your being, the fact that you did not turn away when I dared to challenge the sacred cows of religion that signifies a deep, powerful, and undeniable truth. That deep tremor reverberating in your chest is the ultimate testimony. Your spirit recognizes the frequency of truth, even when it is delivered in a vessel that challenges your comfort. This is the specific, preordained rhythm of destiny itself. Halt now in this holy silence, and let the sheer gravity of this revelation soak into the marrow of your being. We have arrived at the threshold of the year 2026. This is the monumental continuation, the breaking of the seal after 400 years of quietude. The mass exodus from the hollowed-out corridors of institutionalized religion is no mere coincidence of the times. It is a celestial alignment of the highest order. Guard your mind against the lie that this is chaos or random chance. This is not the adversary besieging the sanctuary, despite what the trembling hirelings behind the pulpit would have you believe in their desperation to maintain control. On the contrary, this is the ancient scroll of prophecy unfurling before your very gaze. It is the sovereign clock of the heavens finally striking its appointed hour. We are that specific lineage, the chosen ones ordained by the Most High, to witness the prison doors of the age swinging shut and the dawn of the great restoration breaking forth. Understand that your existence was not random. You were woven into the complex tapestry of time for this specific apex of human history. You walk the soil of this earth during the manifestation of decrees spoken by prophets thousands of years ago. Let the colossal weight of that reality shake your bones. Let it jolt you from the deepest spiritual coma into a state of total, electrifying awareness. Your presence here is no cosmic error. This agitation in your soul, this refusal to remain asleep, is not rebellion, but the inevitable, magnetic pull of your destiny. Though this specific transmission is drawing to its close, realize that your true pilgrimage is only just beginning. You stand now upon a precipice of decision, facing a fork in the road that will define your future. You possess the free will to turn back, to squeeze your eyes shut, and retreat into the fog of slumber. You may return to the comforting embrace of the lie, and surrender once again to the machinery that exists only to devour you. You can resume the masquerade, pretending to have peace, while your inner spirit screams in agony against the illusion. Or, you can step into the searing, purifying light of truth. You can elect to be truly free. You can choose to march in the authority of this newfound gnosis, executing a divine strategy for liberation. The primary directive is absolute. Stop feeding the beast. Cease providing sustenance to the very systems and structures designed to keep you in chains. If the sanctuary you attend bows to mammon rather than the Most High, where the shepherd fattens himself on luxury while the flock wastes away, you must cut the supply line. Halt the automatic tribute. Refuse the offerings wrung from you through manipulation and guilt. Redirect those precious resources back into the living, breathing body of your people. Extend your hand to the neighbor whose roof is crumbling under the crushing demands of the world. Fill the empty cupboards of the mother struggling alone. Sow seeds into the mind of a child hungry for knowledge. Let your substance flow where it cultivates life and hope, not where it merely paints gold upon the cage of a charlatan. The second command is to become a diligent scholar of your own soul. Unroll the scrolls to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Scrutinize the ancient curses and judge for yourself if they do not mirror the blood-stained history of your own kin. Immerse yourself in Acts chapter 7 and Genesis chapter 15, meditating deeply on the prophecy of the 400 years. Look into the mirror of Exodus, and behold your own face reflected within the narrative of deliverance. Permit no man to stand as the gatekeeper of your understanding. Beseech the Holy Spirit to be your personal tutor. Thirdly, seek out the fellowship of those whose eyes have also been touched by this awakening. You require a tribe, a true, organic brotherhood, not the theatrical performance of Sunday mornings, where masks are worn tight and authentic tribulations are swept into the shadows. Locate those who are traversing this same rugged terrain. Forge bonds cemented in veracity and reciprocal strength, rather than fragile structures built on human hierarchy and spiritual domination. Fourthly, pay homage to the ancient bloodline from which you spring. Excavate your history that predates the chains of bondage. Comprehend the majesty and royalty of your true origin. Explore the deep roots connecting you to the Hebrew-Israelite heritage. Investigate the majestic civilizations of the so-called Dark Continent that basked in glory and wisdom long before the cold shadow of colonization ever dared to touch them. Seize back the chronicle that was stolen from your memory. Your identity is not defined by the shackles of a descendant of slaves. That is a lie told to keep you small. Slavery is merely a tragic event in your timeline, not the essence of your soul. Your true nature is ancient, regal, elected by the divine, and potent beyond measure. Spread this message with purpose and tactical wisdom. Identify the one who walked away from the pews carrying the heavy, undeserved burden of shame. Reach out to the soul who senses the discord in the spirit, but lacks the vocabulary to name it. Your sacred commission, should you have the courage to embrace it, is to become a beacon of truth in an era submerged in deceit. You are called to embody freedom within a matrix engineered for captivity, to stride confidently in your authentic self amidst a world conspiring to keep you in a state of permanent amnesia. The 400 years have run their full course. The ancient chains of the curse are shattering over your life in this very instant, turning to dust at your feet. You are the prophesied offspring, destined to tread the path of liberation. Let us now seal this truth with a solemn invocation that echoes through the heavens. This shall not be the groveling plea you were trained to recite, but a decree of sovereignty that establishes your emancipation once and for all. O Most High Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Elohim of our forefathers, we offer profound gratitude for this day. We give thanks for the year 2026. We praise you for the absolute finality of the 4 centuries of prophetic subjugation. Father, deal with every shepherd who has wandered from your path and merchandised your people for their own gain. May their empires of dust collapse like the ancient walls of Jericho. Let their veils of deception be torn asunder, mirroring the great fall of Babylon. We petition for the total, 7-fold restitution of all that was plundered from us. Restore our names, our heritage, our chronicles, and our honor. We speak a decree of absolute liberty over this rising generation. We declare liberation from the sorcery of spiritual manipulation, from the chains of financial usury, from the imagery of a foreign Messiah, and from the venom of the prosperity gospel. We stand in reverence of our ancestors, who endured the long, dark night of 400 years. We speak across the veil. We see you. We hold you in our remembrance. We are the finishers of the race you began. The curse of generations is severed. The timeline of prophecy is fulfilled. The great exodus has commenced. The awakening has dawned. In the mighty name of Yeshua, not the painted Eurocentric idol of stone and canvas, but the authentic Hebrew Messiah of our own bloodline, we offer this prayer. So be it. Selah. You are no longer bondsmen. You are no longer under the spell of deception. You are released from the grip of institutions that sought only your servitude. You are Israel. You are the elect. You are royalty. You are liberated. Now, stride forth in that reality. Walk in the unshakable truth you now possess. Walk in the freedom foretold by the ancients. Walk boldly in the identity that was obscured by fog, but is now unveiled in glory. Go forth in peace. Go forth in dominion. Go forth in absolute veracity. And never forget, the 400 years have ended. The chapter that follows is written by your own hand. The cloud of witnesses, your ancestors, are observing from the galleries of heaven. Your progeny awaits the legacy you will forge, and the Most High walks beside you with every stride. To construct a fortress of unity for the days ahead, seek out the assembly of the righteous in digital forums or local gatherings for the study of the Word and reciprocal fortification. In this manner, we shall weave a tapestry of support that glorifies our heritage and emboldens one another as we rise together in this great awakening. We stand now at the threshold of a hallowed odyssey, venturing fearlessly into the pulsating heart of absolute conviction. Here, we pierce the shimmering shroud of antiquity to behold the grand design of the cosmos, the heavy burden of true meaning, and the silent, guiding touch of the divine architect. Understand that this is no realm for idle speculation. It is a solemn pilgrimage navigating the celestial currents of sacred narrative. We strive to reveal how the tempered steel of endurance and the radiant beacon of destiny are fused inextricably within the human saga, echoing the whispers of the Holy Scrolls. This sanctuary of law is consecrated to the holy labor of unearthing the profound spiritual arcana buried deep beneath the sediments of history and scripture. Our vocation is to recount the legends that disturb the deep waters of reflection, shielding your spirit with faith while inviting you to embrace the timeless dignity of your divine origin. Every vision and syllable here has been woven with intent, serving as a lighthouse for enlightenment and a vessel to stir the sleeping soul. It is forged from the raw, elemental iron of ancient themes, the resounding interpretations of the past, and the quiet, reflective mirrors of deep meditation. Let the world know that this endeavor seeks only to unify and elevate, wielding no weapon of malice, exclusion, or enmity against any soul that breathes. If this message finds a dwelling place within your heart, honor our journey by bestowing your favor upon it and passing the torch to those who still wander the night. Inscribe your own wisdom in the chronicles below and ally yourself with this fellowship, awaiting the forthcoming unveilings of power, truth, and the ancient way.